All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. I apologize for being a little late. We have a big Shabbos, as mentioned, but we're ready to get started. So today we actually have multiple things to talk about because this is a very special Torah portion. This is I I shared a little bit of an anecdote, a humorous anecdote this past Shabbos morning about when we were in yeshiva, a lot in Crown Heights. Instead of having a kind of for the amount of yeshiva bachrim and the turnover rate, it made more sense for the central yeshiva of Chabad to give you like a meal ticket to go have at whatever restaurant or nearby food place rather than kind of have a lunchroom that was big enough, cafeteria that was big enough to house everybody. It was not that it wasn't a lot of money. So in an effort to make things to stretch it as far as it would go, I would frequent a place that had its heyday back in the day. It was Mermelstein's, was one of the foremost caterers in New York, and they had kind of a storefront where any excess prepared foods that they had made for a particular event or whatever it is, they would sell by the pound the next day or even that day. And they did some pretty brisk businesses. The place still exists and it still carries through because it's at this point kind of no frills. It's not really a caterers anymore, but they would still prepare and they sell food by the pound. So like kind of like Shabbos food, whatever it is, you can get chicken in 5 different ways, a little brisket, a little bit of this or what have you, and it's all sold by the pound. And its freshness was quite dubious. This so led to a routine of mine where I would come in and the guy behind the counter, I would come in and I'd say, "Hi, Yitzchak, what's fresh?" To which he would answer to me, this Russian fellow would answer always, "Everything's fresh, very fresh, everything very fresh." And then we would start. I would ask him. We would haggle about whatever it is, and so this was our typical routine. One time I walked into the place and I said, "Hi, Yitzchak, what's fresh? Fresh, everything's fresh, everything's fresh." And then I pointed to something that looked interesting. I said, says, what about that?" He got so excited that he actually pointed at the one thing that was fresh that he went, "Oh, that's fresh." So every parsha is special, and every. I
wondered where you were going with this.
I was trying to convince everybody to go buy some lunch. No, but every parsha is special. But this parsha obviously is unique because in it is the Aseret HaDibrot. The 10 Commandments are in this parsha, the foundation of everything. And that's important to understand. It's not just the foundation of the Torah and the Torah laws, but it is the foundation of everything. We'll talk about that in a moment. It also is Tu B'Shvat. Today is Tu B'Shvat. Today is the day that we celebrate the birthday of the trees. Now, many a millennial or Gen Alpha, I guess is what they call them now, Gen Alpha, would call that cultural appropriation. What right do we have to be celebrating the tree's birthday? It's the tree's day. It's not our day. It's why are we celebrating the tree's birthday? Why is that our day? So we'll try and connect the two concepts together. And let's start with Parshat Yitro and the 10 Commandments. It is hard, really, to define exactly what the 10 Commandments are for us. They are so central in Judaism, so central in all culture nowadays. Any culture that is kind of a monotheistic, let's call it the Abrahamic cultures, the 10 Commandments is the most essential and foundational collection of precepts that it is hard to really define what exactly is it, because interestingly enough, for the most part, they're not a set of laws that we keep. In fact, pretty much every single one of the 10 Commandments, even if it has some specific law, some specific do or don't, gets reiterated somewhere else in the Torah, and oftentimes it is that other place that is the source that the Rambam cites to when talking about that particular command. For example, killing, stealing, Shabbos, etc. These are things that exist in other places in the Torah, and when the Rambam cites where we have the source for not killing, for not stealing, for keeping Shabbos, it will not necessarily cite back to the Ten Commandments. So this collection, and what are these? Are these like the 10 most important mitzvahs? We don't even call them mitzvahs. We call them the Aseret HaDibrot, utterances, statements. So it is, we know they're central, we know they're important, but what are they to us? And so to be able to understand this, we have to actually back up and ask another question, because that's always the way we do things. We answer questions with a question, right? So we have another question. The Ten Commandments begins with a statement that sounds pretty similar to statements that we have introducing any of the passages in the Torah that give us a command of what we are meant to do, what we're not meant to do, etc. Most of those begin Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, right? Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. And Hashem said to Moshe, saying, or to say, to relate to the Jewish people. Now, in this case, Hashem is speaking directly to the Jewish people, and so in this one is not Hashem el Moshe. It says rather Vayidaber Elikim et kol hadvarim ha'ila lemor, and God uttered all these things to say. And then begins Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And at first glance, that would seem a very intuitive way to introduce, right? Pretty much whenever you're introducing a statement, especially something as important like this, you can't just start from Anochi. You got to give it some sort of at least one line introduction, right? And God said all these things to say, lay more. What is puzzling about this? What is puzzling about it is that lay more, when that last word lay more seems not only superfluous, but actually giving a command to the people, or giving a task to the people that they couldn't properly fulfill. When Hashem says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor," when the Torah says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor," God said to Moses, saying, the understanding is very simple. God says it to Moshe, and Moshe is to relay it to the people. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe to relay to Klal Yisrael, to the Jewish people. What that makes this lemor particularly difficult to understand. That it says over here, Vayidaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'ela, and Elokim said all these things, lemor, to relay.
That's only if you think it has to do with him speaking to the people at that moment.
Oh, well, so first of all, so lemor, let me flesh out the question, then Paula will jump in. So we say, Vayidaber Elokim, and Hashem said all these things, lemor, to relay. Relate to who? Relate to who? Who are these supposed to be relayed to? Everybody was there. All the Jewish people were here, were there, hearing it directly from God. Right? So who are they going to relay it to? So Paula says, go ahead, Paula.
Well, to you and me, to Jews throughout time.
So that one answer is, as Paula just said, that it's lemor, that in this we have the responsibility, as we later reiterates in the Shema, right? V'shinamtam levanecha v'dibarta bam, right? To teach it to the future generations. This generation heard it, but they have a responsibility to teach it to the next generation. Except, what does it say? It says that all souls were at Mount Sinai. Because God, God made a covenant with us at Mount Sinai. And if we, me, you, and etc., were not there at Mount Sinai, then we have an escape clause to say, I never made the covenant. Maybe my great-grandfather, except that all souls, even the souls of future converts, were all brought to Mount Sinai to be present at Mount Sinai. And we all heard it. Not just those alive in that generation, but all future generations were also there at Mount Sinai, all hearing it from God. At which point, Paula, the question comes back up. So then, Lamar, if we were all there, then relaying it to who exactly? And so, allow me to get a little Kabbalistic here, with your permission. These 10 dibrot mirror another 10. Another seminal 10. If you begin from the start of the Torah, from Bereshit bara Elokim, how far do you have to go into the text to find the number 10? The answer is it's right there, chapter 1. God creates the world with his words, with his utterances, right? Vayomer Elokim yihi or, right? And then Vayomer Elokim yihi rakia b'toch hamayim, right? Let there be the light, let there be the sky, right? Vayomer Elokim, Tadshe haaretz desha, let the ground produce a fertile green, right? Etc. Count up the amount of utterances that God says. How many times in that first chapter of the Torah, in the span of the 6 days of creation, does it say Vayomer Elokim?
10.
Anybody want to take a guess?
10.
10. 10. Which leads to the understanding of what is called the Asara Mamarot, the 10 utterances. The 10 utterances. At the start of creation, this world comes into being with the 10 utterances, not 11, not 9, 10. 10 utterances with which God creates the world. How many Sefirot are there?
10.
10. This is not just random coincidence that we have 10. Oh, another 10 here. That's so nice. Rather, the understanding is that God was installing each of the Sefirot with each one of his utterances. You could go to Kabbalistic works, and they'll spell out the utterances, how each utterance equals one of the Sefirot. We're not going to do that right now because then that'll take the whole class in that direction. But suffice it to say that the building blocks of existence, the elements of existence, are these 10 utterances. These 10 utterances that introduce the 10 Sefirot. That is the 10 foundational elements of creation of reality. The Asara Ma'amarot, from the word Amar. Now, it is a well-known idea that King David alludes to in his Tehillim when he says the following words. He says, the world shook and then was calmed. The world was shook. Eretz Yara v'shakata. The world shook and was calmed. Because when God was finishing the world, he finished it in 6 days. It says, Vayi erev vayi voker yom hashishi, right? Which it doesn't say about any of the other days of creation. Yom echad, yom sheni, yom shlishi, yom revi'i, yom chamishi, yom hashishi. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, the day 6. Throws in a the about day 6, kind of alluding to a specific day 6. the well-known day 6, the Ohio State University, right? The day 6, right? Which day 6 could it be referring to?
The Ten Commandments?
Good, Diane. You're correct that it says that God made a Tanai Hitana Hakadosh Baruch Hu Ma'aseh Bereshis. God made a deal with with creation that says that this whole creation is in a limbo state. It's going to be in a limbo state until a certain event. And if that event goes correctly, then the world will be allowed to exist. And if this event does not go correctly, then the world will revert back to nothingness and to the abyss. What is this event? And so the world was trembling, right? The world was afraid, as it were. Eretz Yarea. What was the event that calmed the world down? The event that occurred on the day 6, on the day 6. Anybody know what day the Torah was given on? Which day of the month of Sivan was the Torah given? Day 6, the 6th day of Sivan. That was the day God says this day, 6 days of creation, is going to be held in limbo until the 6th of Sivan, until God will present the Jewish people with a choice. The choice of accepting the Torah or not. And if the people don't accept the Torah, then the world won't continue to exist. Why not? As punishment? Why won't the world continue to exist if the Jewish people don't accept the Torah?
Because God needs a partner.
A partner in what? In the very purpose of creation. God says, I didn't create the world because I was bored. I created the world with a purpose, with a goal, with a direction. And if that purpose gets accepted, if the mission gets signed onto, if the world gets put into a place where it can achieve its purpose, then great. Then the world has a raison d'etre. But if, God forbid, the purpose of creation will be rejected by those who are meant to act as the catalytic engines, the drivers of that purpose, then the world has no purpose to exist. So for 2,448 years, the world was trembling because it was in limbo. It was in limbo up until the moment on that 6th day of Sivan that validated the 6 days of creation. When the Jewish people finally accepted their responsibility, Na'aseh v'nishma, to do what? To take the Vayidaber and to put it into the Lamor. Again, the 10 that the Jewish people accepted at Mount Sinai was called the 10 what? Aseret
Dibrot.
Hadibrot, Vayidaber, right?
Okay.
And their job was to infuse it into the Asara Ma'amarot. Their job, Vayidaber Elokim, Hashem says, I am declaring these 10 commandments. I am Vayidaber these Dibrot, lay more for you to invest them into the Amar, into the Mamarot. Who do the Jewish people have to relay it to? Not to themselves, not to their future generations, to reality. You need to relay this to existence, to the world. You need to embed this purpose in the world. Why? Because ultimately, as we've been talking about, this is in a sense the refrain here that kind of underpins Chabad Hasidic philosophy, but ultimately, as we're hearing now, is all of Judaism. The whole purpose of the world, the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah, and the whole purpose of our our existence in this world is to uncover it, as we said last week with the Kriyat Yamsuf, to show the world the holiness that exists in it, to infuse the Aseret HaDibrot into the Asara Mamarot, to take this world and make it more than just a world, to make it a world that is letaken olam, to fix the world by doing what? B'malchut
The
Shaddai.
Malchut Shaddai.
That's what we said Nasa v'nishma to. Almost think about the words Nasa v'nishma, which means we will do and then we will listen. Most people understand God. That means that God, we will commit to doing it even before we begin to study. But then of course we will also study. We won't just do it blindly. We commit blindly, but then we will act knowingly. We will do, and then of course we will also make sure to be educated. But here's a different approach. Na'aseh, we will do this. We will bring the Aseret HaDibrot into the Asara Mamerot. We will bring the holiness of God, the divine, into the world, Vinishma, so that we will be able to hear. Our dab will not be finished until the world starts to declare Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Till our job is not done until the world will start echoing with that divine refrain. Until the world starts to shine with the light of the divine. So the Aseret HaDibrot are meant to be infused, plugged in, and married to the Asar Mamarot. God has to come down onto a mountain. Godliness and this world need to kiss. Heaven and earth need to kiss. And the ones who will make the shadchan, the matchmaker, is us. We're the matchmakers. We are the matchmakers between heaven and earth, between God and His world, between the Aseret HaDibrot and the Asara Mamarot. Which is why it says, right, that this was a moment that the giving of the Torah was a marriage. Marriage between God and the Jewish people, a marriage between God and His world through the Jewish people. This is also why, ultimately, the Ten Commandments get repeated later.
Not exactly the same.
And in fact, that itself actually lends to what we're saying. It gets repeated where?
Fine.
In the book of Devarim, right? In the book of Devarim, and in the book of Devarim, we have the Ten Commandments. Well, we heard it. It was already written in the Torah once. We have it in the Torah. We didn't forget it. Why is it again repeated in the book of Devarim? What is the key difference between the Ten Commandments as they are cited in this week's Torah portion and the Ten Commandments as they are cited in the book of Devarim? And I don't mean textual differences.
Oh.
Who is purveying the Ten Commandments here?
God.
God. And who is purveying the Ten Commandments in the book of Devarim?
Moshe.
Moshe. Nothing in Torah is by accident. The fact that the Torah says that, has it, that we don't suffice with the Ten Commandments as purveyed by God Himself, but rather we have a reiteration of them as purveyed by Moshe, is making a point that, of course, the primary element of the Ten Commandments is the fact that they are God's words uttered to each and every one of us, and that we heard them directly from God Himself. But understand that there is a second half to this effort. And what is the second half of the effort?
Us.
That mankind take it and run with it. God wants us to take ownership of it. At the time that God uttered them at Mount Sinai, it was almost too much to handle. In fact, it was too much to handle. What happened to us every single time we heard one of the commandments from God himself? Right? Our souls literally left our bodies. It was literally too much to handle. God says, I don't want it to remain that way. The opposite. I want you to grab it, own it, make it yours. Because that's the point. It should be, the whole goal here is to make a dira lo yizbarich betachtonim, a dwelling for God himself, right? That element is captured in the first of the Ten Commandments. The God himself aspect of it is captured in the first of the Ten Commandments. But where does God want this dwelling? Down here in our world, by our parameters. So that half of that desire gets fulfilled when it's Moshe, i.e., us, that are purveying this message. Moshe takes ownership of God's words, and he purveys them, setting the tone for each and every one of us to do so as well. God doesn't want us just to accept the Ten Commandments. God wants us to turn around and purvey and teach the Ten Commandments. Vayidaber is not, God says, I'm not telling this to you and you shall listen. Right? I am telling this for you to then tell it. Vayidaber to be the lemor. And importantly, what that means is, as we've been talking about and we've been saying a lot in the recent weeks, is that we are not allowed to be the end of the road. Right? That when God says, the very fact that God says, "Vayidaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'ela," that could have been it, right? That, and God uttered all these words, "Anochi Hashem Elokecha," right? It could have said that. No, it says, "Vayidaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'ela lemor." Understand that I am telling this to you with a goal in mind. That what is the goal? That you pass this on. That you pass this on.
For a
Not be like
question.
Noah. Not be
Say,
like Noah.
I can't, Jerry, say it a little clearer.
Not be like Noah.
Not to be a
Noah. Like Noah.
Noah. Yes, correct. Not to be not to take the Ten Commandments and to achieve righteousness. Not, let's say not only is a better way to phrase it. Not only to take the Ten Commandments and grow in your own righteousness, but rather take the Ten Commandments and pay them forward as well. Yeah, yes,
but
and now I'll then connect it to Tu B'Shvat. Paul, go ahead.
I may be the only one here who was completely overwhelmed by what you just said. But I have to say this anyway. I thought our mission, our job, our responsibility, how we accept has to do with passing it on to our people. You're talking about the whole world. I'm pretty
Yes.
overwhelmed by that. I can't
Yes.
imagine that other than leading by example, which we've talked about in the past, there's a reasonable method for one Jew to do this to the whole world. To the rest of the Jews, I can see that. But to the whole world, help me
Sure.
here.
So, all right. So first of all, I'm actually going to broaden the scope. So first, before I even begin to answer, I'm going to make it even bigger.
Wonderful.
You're thinking the whole world is just other human beings. I'm thinking the whole world as in everything. Trees, plants, the ground, everything. Infuse, it doesn't say anywhere that God made the deal just with the other human beings. He didn't make the deal with the human race. He made the deal with the whole world. That he says, he turned to the whole world and says, Jews don't accept the Torah. All of you blink out of existence. And God wanted us to infuse it not just into the utterance that created human beings, but into the utterances that created everything, from the plants to the trees to the sun to the moon to the sun, to everything. And that's our responsibility. Now, here's the thing. Lamor in this approach and this understanding is not lamor as in sit down and teach. It doesn't mean convene, go out to the Tibetan monks and say, okay, Talmud class, sit down, everybody.
That's
right?
what it sounded like.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
No,
good.
it means to infuse, doesn't mean teach the world, but infuse the world with holiness. Some of that is like leading by example. Some of that is by picking up an apple, making a borei pri ha'etz before you eat it, thereby infusing the apple with holiness. By walking down the street with a godly purpose and with a divine purpose, we each are meant to be, right, a light unto nations. You see, that metaphor is exact. The light unto nations doesn't mean that the fire has to touch every single thing and burn everything up. It means it walks around as a beacon of light, and by being a beacon of light, it's lighting up everywhere else. You walk around and be a Jew, keeping the Torah mitzvahs the way you're supposed to, and in places of influence, bring positive influence. Make a kiddush Hashem, where you are sanctifying God's name by being a good example. When somebody looks and says, "There it is," and again, as I said, Paula, it's not by accident that God, many people, and I've shared this point before, and I feel very strongly. We look at the world right now, and everybody, with Israel and all the anti-Semitism, et cetera, and many people ask the question, why do they hate us? Why is it the lot of the Jewish people that the rest of the world hates us? To which I respond, that is not true. It's not our lot to be a hated nation. No. But, and I've shared this in the past, Menachem Begin, Yehuda Avner was one of like Israel's most famous career members of the government, advisors, diplomats, etc. I guess you could call him like similar to like Israel's Henry Kissinger, except less controversial. Just somebody who really, to a certain degree, became an icon in and of himself, but just by being an advisor and walking the halls of power in Israel. And he was one of Menachem Begin's right-hand man. Now, most of you probably know, the younger generation doesn't understand that Menachem Begin, the reason why he was such a well-known prime minister, the pantheon of Israeli prime ministers, is because he was a radical coming into the office. Up until that point, since the advent of the state of Israel, up until Menachem Begin's victory, the country was ruled by the left-wing Labor Party, Mapai as it was called,
Yep.
and then eventually called Avodah. And Menachem Begin was the disruptor. He was considered a little bit of a terrorist, Jewish terrorist against the British, etc., the Lehi, the Irgun, and he was always a firebrand. And when he rode a wave in victory, he was the disruptor. Many people thought with that the country's going to hell in a handbasket, and to his thing, right, kind of like Lincoln. Founding a different party, and he could have decided, to give his middle finger to the other party and to those on the other side of the ideological divide and say, "Ha, we won, and now we're just going to further foment the divide, and it's going to be us versus you guys." But instead, he tried it differently. He tried to really bring the other side to have an understanding of where he and his ilk came from. And one of the things he did is he would have a Saturday night coffee clutch. Because how do Jews hash out differences? Come down, we'll have a coffee, we'll have a Danish, and we'll figure it all out, later. So Yehuda, and into this he invited the who's who of Israel's intelligentsia, the intellectual class, etc. Like the head of the antiquities department at Hebrew University, and then this philosopher, this advisor, etc. But he did it with an agenda, as I said. He did it not just to, and what they would do is they would study Tanakh together, and they would argue philosophy on this, based on this founding document that was, at the end of the day, religious or not, still at the foundation of the philosophy of all original Zionists, and to this day. Very much. It used to be you couldn't pass your Bagrut, secular Bagrut, unless you were absolutely proficient in all of Tanakh. Unfortunately, that's been removed. It should, I feel very strongly, it should be brought back. But either way, he used this as a way to get into engage in conversations. You see this thing this way, you learn the message that way. I see it that way. So one of these, Yehuda Avner writes that at one of these coffee clutches, they're all he bring up the prophecy of Bilam. One of the only places in the Torah where we have a forward-looking prophecy, not a prophecy, what was happening at the time, or the prophecy about something that happened in the past, but what will be happening in the future. And Bilam looks at the Jewish people and he says a very famous line, Hein am levadad yishkon.
Yeah,
They're a nation that will always be alone.
exactly.
And he turns to all these people in the room and he says, what does this mean? This prophecy in the Torah about the Jewish people that we will always be a nation, is that a curse? Is that a blessing? What is this? What do we make of this? Now you have to understand that with this, he was challenging a lot of those people who were of the original Zionist philosophy. Do you know what the original Zionist philosophy had nothing to do with the Holy Land? It had nothing to do with the reestablishing the Jewish people in the land and reconnecting with our history, etc., etc. The main goal of most of the earlier Zionists was what?
Avodah.
But to become a nation among nations. The reason why we wanted a country was so that we were nobody else's sbackyard anymore. This is why we're going to get rid of anti-Semitism. We're going to disappear into the map. We're just going to become that pink splotch next to the green splotch that nobody cares about. Just like nobody knows what's happening in Guyana and nobody cares what's happening in Guyana, we're just going to be another country. In other words, the idea that the reason that the world gives us so much tsaris is because we're in their backyard. If we just get out of their backyard and we had our own little country doing our own little thing in our own little corner of the world, nobody would know us. So this is a philosophy by many of the original. Don't forget, the whole Zionism was meant to be as an antidote to anti-Semitism that was not going away, right? Theodore Herzl, who was a reporter about the whole Dreyfus trial, realized that there's never going to be cannot count on humanity to mature past anti-Semitism. So this is it. So we'll just disappear. We'll get out of everybody's backyard. We'll have our own little country, be it in Madagascar or fine. So Israel, that gets at least our own nostalgic juices going. But the point is to disappear into the map. Menachem Begin comes and says, guys, the Torah here with this quote, Hein am levadad yishkon, is telling us about the futility of that effort. It doesn't mean you are a nation that will stand alone. It means you are a nation that will always stand apart. Because the moment that we said Na'aseh v'nishma, that we accepted that contract with God at Mount Sinai, to be the nation that will bring that will be the leaders, the catalytic, the light onto nations, the pioneers, and bringing divinity into the world, into the whole world, God made sure that the rest of the world is paying attention to us. We cannot fade into the background. We've accepted that responsibility, and that's the truth. Not that the whole world hates us, but the whole world knows about us and is paying attention to us, whether we like it or not. And therefore everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an opinion about the Jews. As I said, how many of you know about the Eritreans? Anybody know about the Eritreans? Anybody even know where Eritrea is? Does anybody really care where Eritrea? No, by the way, this is no offense to any Eritreans who will be watching this video, but the point is, why do I say the Eritreans? Because at one point there was once one of the General Assemblies of the UN, and the Prime Minister of Eritrea pulled over the ambassador to Israel. I think it was Abba Eban at the time or whatever. And he says, I don't get it. My country is about 8 times the size of yours in landmass and in population, and nobody knows I exist. Nobody cares. You're this tiny little sliver of a nothing of a country, and everything, all the resolutions are for you or against you, about you. Some reason, everybody is talking about Israel. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of all the attention going to you. So that's the truth of the matter, Paula. to a certain degree, we don't have to even necessarily go out and find everybody in every nook and cranny. The world is hardwired to pay attention to the Jew out of the corner of their eye. Either out of the corner of their eye, sometimes turning their full attention. Many of them hate us and resent us. Many of them love us. The whole South Korea is studying Talmud. You know, there's more Talmud sold in South Korea than there is in Israel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of the Jew. It's not because of the Talmud, it's because of the Jew.
Also witness Kanye.
So, let's say, Jerry, it's coming in very unclear.
Can't hear that. Witness Kanye.
Right. Right. Another Meshuggah, right? Whose name I'm not even going to mention, because he doesn't deserve that kind of attention. But I'll use it as an example for another Meshuggah that has all the money and the fame, whatever it is, and still he can't help himself. Can't help himself. I mentioned this a few times. I'm going to have to end a little bit early because I do have a 2 o'clock class. But I was sitting there once, as I mentioned this, that back in the day, if you wanted to have your device, let's say your iPod, iPad, or whatever it is, playing music on the speakers of your phone, and you didn't have a way to plug it in to, the speakers of your car, you didn't have a way to plug it in directly because you don't have a jack. They created a thing, an FM transmitter, right? You found a blank channel on the FM dial that was from your antenna in the car was seeking, and there's nothing on the waves, on the airwaves from that FM channel. And what it does is you would plug your iPod into that, and it would you pick that a channel, and it would broadcast whatever's playing on your iPod onto that channel, and your car's antenna picked it up, and so it would be playing through that FM channel into your car. That's an FM transmitter. Nowadays you don't need it because nowadays they basically have created a direct way to plug your iPod into the car. But back in the day, that was so I had it. So you turn it to some obscure FM channel, and you can then have it. One time I turned on the FM channel. I turned on the car. It was on that FM channel, and before I was about to, sync it with my iPod, all of a sudden I hear something coming through on that channel.
Mm.
And it was this interesting kind of like all things considered radio talk show about, talking some 2 eggheads talking on a particular conflict, this C-list conflict. It's not like one of the major conflicts like Gaza and Israel or like Ukraine and Russia. This is like a C-list, like only involves Albania and something else, some other country, whatever. I forgot what it was. It was like at the time it was in the papers for about a day and a half. But they were discussing it in the ins and outs. And me, like, I enjoy information. So I'm like, oh, I know nothing about this. If I listen for 5 minutes, I'm going to learn something. So I can now sound like the smarter guy at the water cooler. I now have some information about this thing that's happening that's getting everybody's attention for a day and a half. So I'm listening, and they're talking about who the players are and all this, whatever it is. I had my fill of it. I'm about to change the channel. I'm literally leaning forward to change the channel on my car radio. And then one of them says, but you know who's really behind all of this? I'm like, oh, now I have to hesitate. Now I have to listen, because if 10 seconds more of the investment of my time, and I'm going to know who's really behind all this. So the other one says, who? And the guy says, Rothschild. And I'm like, I almost drove my car off the road. I'm like, Rothschild? The 1800s are calling. They want their anti-Semitism back. A Rothschild? What is going on? How did Rothschild get involved? This was happening in another part of the world, period. But then this guy made some tortured connection back to a banker in England whose name is Rothschild, who has some oil interests in this and that and whatever it is. And magically, it's all about the Jews again.
Mm.
The world is never going to let the Jews fade into the background, because God has wired the world in its effort to arrive at its goal to have this instinctual need to look at what is Klal Yisrael doing. You're the ones who accepted Naaseh v'Nishma. You said it, B'nai Israel. So therefore, now that you've taken the role and responsibility to be the captain, I'm going to have everybody else on the team paying attention to the captain. Here's what we need to do. We just need to follow the Ten Commandments. We need to just follow the Torah. It doesn't. We don't have to actually do anything. We could leave it to the Rebbe and other such great leaders to do the cosmic. The rest of us just need to follow the Torah and understand that the import of what we are doing is not just for ourselves and our own refinement, but it is because it brings the whole world. Take the time that when you're out there and you're on the street to be a paragon of the divine virtue that the Torah has given us, the gift. Understand that when God gives us the Torah as a gift, he's not just giving it to us. It is investment in us, and it's a gift for the world. The whole world needs the Torah.
It's a very important clarification. Thank you. No, really,
absolutely.
It's really important.
Absolutely. And now let's connect it to Bishvat.
Sure.
Okay? Why do we have the audacity to celebrate the birthday of the trees? Is because ultimately the birthday of the trees is our birthday as well. Why? Because Ki Adam Eitz HaSadeh, the Torah tells us we are like a tree. Tree has three primary elements that make it unique, really, from any other creation. That we have to understand that is to us as well. These character traits have to be in each and every one of us. The first one is the roots. That the tree is 50% its roots and 50% what exists above the ground. Do you know that the same mass that exists above the ground is equaled by the root structure? The root structure has the same mass underground as the tree has above ground. We are not who we are if it wasn't for our roots. For all those who came before us, we need to respect that. We need to cherish that. We need to understand that. We need to learn from that. They are our stability. They are how we got to where we are. Having said that, we can't just be our roots, right? We need to be those above ground. We can't just say, I had a great-great-great-grandfather who was a famous rabbi in this town, and I'm proud to be Jewish. I'm proud to be Jewish because we have such a great history. But what makes you a Jew? How are you a Jew? How are you the part above ground that matches the great legacy of where you came from? That's point number one. Point number two, a tree never stops growing. A tree never stops growing. Most other things grow and they peak, they plateau, and oftentimes actually revert, right? Or regress, rather. A tree, how do you know the age of a tree? By its growth rings. Because as long as you can see, if it is how it grows is how long it lived. Because there's never a point where it's living but not growing. Right? A tree grows and grows and grows as long as it's alive. The same thing, a Jewish person. If God gives you another day, then you need to grow. That day needs to mean something. And lastly, to this point, to the point we've been saying about the trees. Which trees particularly do we celebrate on Tu B'Shvat?
Israel's trees.
Good, true. Fruit trees.
Oh, fruit trees.
Because, right, we celebrate the fruit, right? The 7 special fruits of Israel. Because fruit trees have that nature. It's not only about the sweetness of the fruit, it's about what existed fruit. Seeds. It's not good enough to become a big, tall tree. You have to give off fruit that later provides seeds that grow new trees. You have to be giving, right? The giving tree, right? You have to give. It's not good enough to take the Torah and grow spiritually to great spiritual heights. You need to bear fruit. We need to bear fruit. All right, everybody?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. This is very interesting. I learned a lot.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. That was the effort. That was the endeavor.
Right.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, everybody. All the very best.
Wow. Wow. Paula.
Yeah. Sure.
This was interesting, very interesting. I learned a lot.
That's wonderful to hear. You don't know how happy that